China conducts naval exercises throughout its territorial waters while the U.S. leads the world's largest naval drill in Hawaii. Is this maritime saber-rattling at risk of a military mishap? And the U.S. fails to use a snapback provision in the Iran nuclear deal to reimpose sanctions on Iran. Has the U.S. snubbing multilateralism run its course? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. The Chinese Navy has been holding simultaneous exercises in 4 bodies of territorial waters along China's coast. This follows the U.S. sending an aircraft carrier strike group to the South China Sea on August the 14th in a series of movements for so-called honoring commitments to regional allies. Since August the 17th, the U.S. has been leading the world's biggest international maritime exercises, RIMPAC 2020, near Hawaii. Although China had attended previous RIMPAC exercises, they have been excluded from the 2018 and current editions. Experts caution that the risk of China-U.S. military conflict is rising. So how can military mishaps be avoided on the high seas? Joining me from the U.S., we have Stanley, Defense and Foreign Affairs Analyst, joining us. We will have a Chinese analyst joining us a bit later. But Mr. Kober, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, a little bit of background for our viewers about these drills. Now, in the Bohai Gulf area, a live-fire combat exercise began on Monday and will continue through September the 30th. In the South China Sea, 2 separate exercises began on Monday and will end on Saturday. In the Yellow Sea, from last Saturday to this Wednesday, the People's Liberation Army Navy is engaged in a large-scale live ammunition operation. And in the middle of August, the PLA Navy held drills in the East China Sea already. In fact, in July, China had conducted military exercises in the South China Sea and the Yellow Sea and the East China Sea as well. So, Mr. Kober, from your perspective, how do you see the PLA conducting drills in multiple waters simultaneously? What do you think the U.S. side is interpreting China's latest military drills in these waters?
We believe, we are taught that you prevent war by deterrence. I mentioned this when I was here last week. So we are signaling, don't cross us. You are now also adopting this language of deterrence. I see this when I read the Chinese media. And in the 1950s, we called this brinkmanship. You take things to the brink. It's like a game of chicken, but it can get out of hand. A textbook that all of us read when we're in the strategic studies departments at our universities is a book called Arms and Influence. And it has a chapter there called The Rationality of Irrationality. That if you appear to be the more irrational, you will win the game of chicken. The problem with that is if both sides believe that, nobody may back off before you have a disaster. And that is what concerns me. I understand there is some communication still going on, that Secretary Esper is still in contact, may visit China. And I understand from at least one news report that Chinese forces have been told not to initiate any sort of hostile fire with American forces. So that, we haven't really reached that very high level, but it is signaling, and as you point out, with all these exercises, everybody is sending a message here.
Mm-hmm. When you say we, Mr. Kober, who exactly do you refer to?
I'm talking about American officials. This is what we are taught. We all come through the schools, and we learn this stuff.
All right, all right. Yeah. We have just been joined by our Chinese guest, Mr. Lu Xiang, who is Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, to get some Chinese perspective on this. Mr. Lu, it looks like China is doing a lot, or flexing its military, its maritime muscles in a very strong, very high-profile way. But help us understand the motivations and the possible backdrop of these exercises. Why so many? Why all of, simultaneously in all of these places?
I understand that the current international relations are in turmoil, especially the China-U.S. relation. Now, because of the politics, internal politics in the United States, actually our relation now is highly unpredictable. China now, I agree with Mr. Kober, is playing a rational game to deter any further, any possible provocation and hostilities, and China is prepared to give a predictable response to any unpredictable circumstances. So this is why I'm thinking that the Chinese military is taking such a scale of military drills in the 4 sea areas.
But what do you mean by U.S. provocation? Because we have talked about U.S. provocation, but specifically, what kind of actions from the U.S. side have provoked the Chinese side? Are these intentional, or is it a matter of perception, Mr. Lu?
Yeah, some military postures of the United States in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait are widely perceived as provocative to China's sovereignty, and there is risk. The U.S. military now is very close to China's coastal area, and the 2 militaries are very close to each other. So there's a risk and a danger for the 2 militaries to get into kind of incidents or accidents or any kind of contingencies. So the drills are meant to be a deterrence of any further provocation.
Mr. Kober, some people are worried that the risk of military confrontation, although not a full-on war between the 2 sides, but the risk of a military confrontation, sometimes because of miscalculation, has considerably risen. What do you think? How large is the possibility of a military mishap between the 2 countries?
I'm concerned that, particularly for Taiwan, my sense is we may be seeing a major crisis. This concerns me more than the South China Sea. The consensus since we began the opening seems to be shifting now. There are changes in identity, and this raises emotional issues on both sides of the Taiwan Straits. We tend to underestimate these issues, these emotional issues, the power of identity in international relations. Now I think they are dominant, and this is where I think a major risk of escalation could occur. This worries me more than the South China Sea, actually.
Who holds the key here? I mean, how things will develop, whether it goes worse from here, whether it alleviates from here. Which side do you think holds the key, Mr. Kober?
This is what concerns me. If I look at it, I don't see anybody going off the off-ramp, and there seems to be this emphasis on deterrence, where everybody thinks the other guy will back down. I have compared this to the situation before the First World War. The Austrians thought they could act against Serbia. Russia would not intervene because Austria had the guarantee from Germany. Everybody thought the other guy would back down, and they underestimated the emotional impact here, and nobody backed down, and you had a catastrophe. And I fear we could have similar misjudgments in this situation. And that's why I'm emphasizing the need for continuing dialogue here.
Mr. Lu, do you see the situation in a similar light as Mr. Kober, or does the Chinese side see the situation in that same light? Because the situation was not so bad. It seems that things took a rather dramatic turn, right? Only in the past few months, when the situation deteriorated dramatically, when the United States decided that they needed to change their position on the South China Sea. They were making themselves much more present in the Taiwan Straits, and they were engaging much more aggressively with the Taiwan authorities as well.
Actually, I like history, but here I don't like the comparison between the current situation and the situation before the World War I or II. You know, at that time, actually, there are many claimants for power, for the world power, for a dominant position. And then now the competition is only between the U.S. and China. The U.S. side want to involve more claimants into this kind of dispute, but now it's purely between our two countries. The first and second largest economy of the world. So now the current situation, as I understand, is simpler than the situations in the history. And if our two countries can get into a rational dialogue, we can avoid any further confrontation.
Mr. Liu, what is the realistic prospect of such dialogue going on? Because we see some messages coming from the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Esper. He says he could, you know, he wanted to visit China. He may visit China, but on the other hand, the U.S. is also seen or perceived as being very provocative on these areas. So, what's the likelihood that these two sides can have a meaningful dialogue, and can they have such meaningful dialogue?
We are very pleased that we heard something from the U.S. side that it's better for the two sides to sit down together. But the problem, you know, is that we have heard too many voices from the U.S. side. Now we don't know who is representing the U.S. government. That's a major problem for us. There are too many uncertainties on the U.S. side. So this is why we have to be prepared for worst case, for very bad case scenario.
Mr. Kober, briefly, what is the stance of the U.S. administration? Because Mr. Esper seemed not to be fully in sync with the Trump administration, and you're having this general elections coming on. So who can speak for the U.S. military? Very briefly, please.
Well, I mean, the president, in our Constitution, all the executive power is with the president. And he had an interview over the weekend with Fox News, and the question of Taiwan came up. And he didn't want to give an answer on that. He said, wait a few days, he was going to say something. So I'm wondering if we're going to have some sort of statement in the next few days. But he didn't want to say it then, and it hints that something is changing. And that, you know, we'll just have to wait and see. But a lot of the rhetoric is tightening, as you mentioned, you know, the military maneuvers and the focus on the election. I haven't really seen anything quite like this. The obsession with China is really quite overwhelming.
Finally, Mr. Liu, now 3 top Chinese officials, senior leaders actually included, have come out and talked about China being very sincere. China wants to keep all the dialogue channel open and want to see the relationship stabilize. And yet, at the same time, China is also flexing its muscles, right, in these territorial waters, sending a very strong message that it's going to fight back if it has to. So where does China's red line stand?
China's red line is that we have to protect our sovereignty. We have to prevent Taiwan from being an independent state. So we have to maintain peace in the Northeast Asia. And we have quite a few things to be concerned. And the basic thing is that it's better we don't see any kind of real military confrontation between U.S. and China.
Yeah, definitely nobody hopes that, but yeah, but it seems that at this moment we have to prepare ourselves. Many thanks to Stanley Kober, Defense and Foreign Affairs Analyst, and Xiang from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. When we come back, the U.S. fails to use a snapback provision in the Iran nuclear deal to reimpose sanctions on Iran. Will this teach the U.S. the shortcomings of shunning multilateralism? Stay with us. This is The Point.